TJ, and I'm the Director of Communications here at the Grove, which really just means I do a little bit of everything. But I come from a background in student ministry. I spent almost 12 years doing student ministry as a youth pastor. 12 long years of church vans that smell like dirty old Doritos for no reason at all. 12 long years of middle school boys keeping you up till 3 a.m. at camp making fart noises. Stop making fart noises, please. But I'm excited about being here at the Grove and bringing my experience and my passions for the gospel here with the team at the Grove. I believe that here at the Grove we have an incredible staff who have some really great strengths, but also some weaknesses that complement one another. In church, I believe that the best is yet to come here at the Grove. A couple people are excited about that too. Cool. Well, hey, real quick, I'm new here. I want to introduce you guys to my family. I'll throw a picture up on the slide. This is my family at the West Farm Corn Maze last year. The girl in the pic, that is my wife. We've been married, Amber. We've been married for about 2.5 years, right? And I'll tell you a little bit more about her in a second. The dachshund in my arm is our oldest. I don't like the phrase fur baby, but these are our children, okay? The dachshund, she's getting there. She's about 7.5, and her name is Riley. She's brindle. I've never seen another brindle dachshund before. If you have one, don't show me, because in my mind, she's the only one and she's perfect. And then the center of the picture, the star of the show, if you ever see the four of us out in public, everyone goes right to her. Her name is Poppy. She's a corgi. She's not named after the troll. She's named after a video game character, because I'm a huge nerd. So Poppy, the corgi, just like this picture, is the center of attention, and she is absolutely nuts. Actually, this picture was taken because someone approached us and said, "Can I take a picture of your corgi?" And I said, "Well, you can take a picture of the whole family." So here we are. So I was talking with David a couple weeks ago, and he said, "Hey man, I was wondering if you could fill in for me 1 week in October." I said, I think that's a great idea. It'll give me a chance to get to know the church, give them a chance to get to know me a little bit better. Tell me what day, what topic, and I'll handle it. And we settled everything. I was driving home, probably listening to Bieber, and it hit me. I'm in trouble. I got home and I said, "Babe," I said, "Don't be mad." And she said, "What did you do?" Right? It's always something that I did. I said, "Well, I'm preaching at the Grove in October." And she said, "Well, what day?" I said, "It's October 16th. And she said, "That's fine, TJ. We would have gone to church anyway. We would have gone to worship. But whatever you do, do not call attention to the fact that it's my birthday from the stage." So, church, that's why today we're talking about the Jesus way and how to handle conflict. But conflict can be a serious thing too. Please don't beat me up after church. Conflict can be a serious thing too. It's this serious disconnect that we have with someone else. It can also be just kind of awkward tension that we might have with someone else. And I've found that conflict can really come from anywhere. It can even be a contradiction of two people's passions, or a contradiction of even two Christian people's callings that can rub each other the wrong way. Conflict comes up anytime there's two people that are together. I think that conflict is a lot like public speaking. You know the old phrase that more people are afraid of public speaking than death. So people would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy at a funeral. I think that conflict is the same way. Like, we don't like conflict, right? Nobody, unless you're an MMA fighter, I'd like to be friends with you. But if unless you're an MMA fighter or a WWE superstar, you don't wake up in the morning thinking, "I want to fight somebody today. I want to get on somebody's nerves today." Middle school boys, looking at y'all. I'm just kidding. But seriously, unless you're that person that wakes up in the morning, you get your cup of coffee, you sit down at the computer, and you pull up your neighborhood Facebook page or your neighborhood Facebook group, and you're like, "Who left their trash can out too long?" Like, first of all, don't be that person. But I'd be willing to bet that none of us wake up in the morning and think, "Man, I want to have some good conflict today." In fact, I would argue, church, that more often than not, we like to pretend that it's not even there. Because if we forget about it, or if we put it away in our closet, it'll just go away. If I pretend it's not there, it'll fix itself, right? No, that never happens. But church, what if I told you this morning that conflict doesn't have to be bad? What if I told you that conflict makes a good story great? What if I said that conflict can take a good story and make it great in your own life? But before we get there, let's talk about media, like the things that we love. My favorite movie series of all time is Star Wars. All nine are incredible, and if you disagree, there could be some conflict there. But let's just talk about episodes 4, 5, and 6 real quick. Star Wars, the name implies some kind of galactic conflict. And we spend all 3 episodes wanting the epic lightsaber battle between Luke Skywalker representing the light side of the Force and Darth Vader representing the dark side of the Force. We want the epic battle to come to a conclusion. We thrive on that conflict because we want to see it play out so bad. And when it finally does, we're rewarded with one of the greatest pieces of cinematic history. But could you imagine if Star Wars didn't have that conflict? Could you imagine if I'm going to try not to spoil it for you, church, but listen. These movies came out in the 70s and 80s. If you haven't seen them by now, sorry. But could you imagine Star Wars if the first time Darth Vader sensed who Luke Skywalker really was in their relation to one another? If Darth Vader decided, you know what, I'm going to hang up the bad guy thing. I'm ready to hang up the red lightsaber. I'm tired of blowing up planets full of people. I'm tired of force choking people that disagree with me. I want to just retire to a quiet little planet and focus on being a good dad. Star Wars might still be a good story, but it sure wouldn't be a great one that we're still talking about today. Or what about books? Who likes to read? Okay, I'm very sad at the low number of hands that went up. Guys, come on. You know who reads? Smart people, okay? It makes you smarter. All right, this is one of my favorite books of all time. It's called Are You My Mother? I almost said How I Met Your Mother. That's a TV show. Are You My Mother by P.D. Eastman. I love this book. It's about a little bird who hatches out of his egg, and he's all alone. And so he goes on this epic quest to return the One Ring to Mordor. He goes on an epic quest to find his mother, and he approaches different animals. He runs into a cat, and he's like, are you my mother? Of course the cat's not his mom. He runs into a dog, a hen, and all these various animals. Are you my mother? No, he can't find his mother. Is this little baby bird just going to be left alone to die? And then he runs into a snort. I have a picture of a snort for you guys. And he goes up to the snort, and he says, are you my mother? And the snort says, snort! And it scares the little baby bird. And then the snort picks up the baby bird, and you're like, oh no, the baby bird's going to get crushed. What's going to happen to the baby bird? But the snort actually puts the baby bird back into its nest. And then its mom flies down, and he's like, oh, you must be my mom because you're the first bird I've seen. This is a great story. It stuck with me from childhood. But could you imagine if the conflict didn't exist in this book? Could you imagine if the baby bird just cracked out of his egg and all of a sudden his mom flew down and was like, hey, here's a worm I chewed up. Open your mouth. It might be a good story, but it sure wouldn't be a great story. And then lastly, what about music? I love good music. Who loves a good breakup song? I'll tell you guys what, I haven't been through a breakup in a long time, but listen, if you see me in my truck riding down the road, windows down, 10-minute version of Taylor's All Too Well blasting, and I'm screaming, mind your own business. Because I'm going through it with my girl Taylor, you know what I'm saying? But I think about one of the greatest country songs ever written. When Garth Brooks penned the words, blame it all on my roots, I showed up in boots and ruined your black tie affair. Y'all know that song. That's a great story. And you know what makes it great? The conflict. I mean, a song about my ex getting married, like that might be a good song. But a song about me kicking in the door with my cowboy boots on and picking up his drink, now that's some conflict, baby. And that's a great story. That's going to lead to some physical conflict. But church, what if I told you this morning that conflict makes a good story great, not only in the movies, not only in song and in books, but in your own life also. I believe that God has called us all to live great lives, and I believe all of us are living great lives, but I believe that it's the conflict that we go through that give us those great stories that can lead other people into a life-changing relationship with Jesus. And if you stay with me this morning, I hope to get you there as well. Before I continue, Please, church, in everything that I say this morning, I'm not trying to minimize your hurt. I'm not trying to discredit anything you've gone through or trivialize any of the trauma that you've been through, because I know that what it means to be human is to experience everything, including hurt, including disappointment, at a different level. Things that impact you heavier than someone else, that doesn't make you weird or different. It just makes you human, okay? And so as we navigate this conflict discussion, please don't hear me putting down what you've gone through or make it seem like it's a simple thing to get through. But I will tell you this morning that the Jesus way to navigate conflict leads to reconciliation. The Jesus way to handle conflict leads to reconciliation. See, the goal of conflict resolution, navigating conflict, is not to win. It's not to embarrass the other person. It's not to score more points in an argument than them. It's for reconciliation. It's to bring the relationship back together. We should go into it thinking, how can I redeem this relationship? And the first thought you might have is, well, you don't know what I've been through. And you don't know what this person has said to me or done to me or how severe this hurt might be. And you're right, church, I don't know. But if you stay with me to the end of the message, what I will tell you is that if he can raise Jesus from the dead, there's nothing that God can't reconcile. So who better to speak on conflict than Jesus? This man had nothing but conflict his entire life. In fact, before Jesus was even born, people were plotting to kill him. And every time Jesus came on the scene and tried to make someone's life better, more people wanted to kill him, to the point where he got to the last week of his life and his very best friends turned their back on him and scattered until he was murdered on a cross by some of his former followers and the government. This man knew about conflict. And so we're going to learn from the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 18, starting in verse 15. And the way I like to teach is sometimes I like to read a little bit and stop and talk about it. I hope that's not distracting for you guys, but let's just start with verse 15 in Matthew chapter 18. If your brother or sister sins, and in some translations, in some versions it says sins against you, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you won them over. Good. It's the end. If you can take that person and talk it out, everything's fine. We don't have to make a Facebook post about what you just did. But we can learn so much from that one sentence from Jesus. I think the first thing we learn is that you don't ignore conflict because it never goes away on its own. Don't ignore conflict. It never goes away on its own. We kind of hinted at that a little bit earlier when we said we try to hide it and we try to pretend it's not there. And how often does it resolve itself? Never, right? It just gets bigger and bigger, and you stew on it, and you start listening to heavier music, and you start screaming louder in your truck. Hello, I've been there. Don't ignore conflict. Jesus tells us to not ignore it. It's not going to go away. We're going to have to deal with it at some point. But I would never put words in Jesus' mouth, and I would never dare take words away from Jesus. But I think the absence of the word immediately in this sentence is huge, because sometimes we need to take time to cool off. Take time to cool off. I told the elders and the staff during the interview process, I said, hey, I'm an Enneagram 7, for those of you who care about Enneagrams and personality types. Sometimes I can get worked up, like I get excited about stuff. I don't know, church, if you can tell, but it sounds like I'm yelling, and sometimes it might sound like I'm mad. I'm not mad, I'm just excited. I'm happy, you know? I know that can rub people the wrong way. So sometimes I need to take time to cool off before I have that conversation. I know that if I don't take time to cool off, I might say something that doesn't really reflect well on the Jesus that I follow. And so I need to take time to cool off. But also, what if the person that you have this conflict with needs to take time to process it as well? Forcing them into a conflict resolution conversation might not be the right moment for that. So take time to cool off. Jesus says, take the person one-on-one and point it out with them. Point it out. And so I would say that step one, or no, we're not at step one yet. We're at communicate clearly. Communicate clearly. I think that's important that you let someone know if they're bothering you, if something's going on, you need to address it. It's not a good idea, church, to just pretend that it's not a good idea to be passive-aggressive towards whoever it is that you have conflict with. It's not a good idea to drop little hints and hope they pick it up. When your husband says, babe, what's wrong? Just tell him what's wrong. Somebody said Amber. Oh, man, church, communicate clearly. Let them know what's bothering you. Trust me. The relationship will be better off in the long run from the honesty. So I would say that if we took verse 15 and we wrapped it up in one step, the step one to conflict resolution, the Jesus way, is one-on-one. It's one-on-one. If you have beef with someone, you need to go solve it with that person. I think what Jesus knows is as humans, we try to triangulate. We try to find someone who is just like us, who we know is our hype man. And we call that person and we say, can you believe what so-and-so said about me today? Oh, girl, what'd you say back? Well, I didn't say nothing, but I would have said this. Well, if you said that, then you should have said this. And all of a sudden, you're more mad than when you started. So Jesus is saying, man, if you want to solve this problem, if you want real conflict resolution, step one, take that person and handle it one-on-one. Let's read verses 16 and 17 together. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And if they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. That's pretty harsh words, because you don't have to be a Christian or a Bible scholar to know how pagans and tax collectors were treated by the Jewish community. I learned a few weeks ago from Pastor David that tax collectors, even though they were Jews, were not allowed to worship at the temple. I didn't know that. That's crazy. They were essentially excommunicated from their own community. In church, when I said earlier, like some of us have some deep trauma, and some of us have had conflict in our life from abusers and manipulators and people that just straight up take advantage of us. And I tell you, church, that sometimes it's not healthy to go back into that relationship. Sometimes those people, we need to excommunicate them from our lives. I told students for 12 years, listen, if someone has hurt you in certain ways, if people don't bring out the best in you, if they pull you away from your relationship with Jesus, it's okay to not be around those people. But I also think that Jesus gives us that as a last resort. But sometimes it can be the best solution. But if we look at what Jesus did say, step 2 would be to seek counsel with a neutral party. So we're not finding our hype man that I get accused of being so many times, but we're finding a neutral party. We're finding someone or 2 people who can listen to both sides of the story and help find us some middle ground to navigate that conflict. Seek counsel with a neutral party. Maybe it's a supervisor, maybe it's a parent going through a similar situation. But find a neutral party. And if that doesn't work, Jesus says, step 3, get the church involved. Get the church involved. Now, we're not going to ask you to stand up here, and we're not going to judge Judy it and plaintiff and defend it and argue with each other. But I'm telling you that we have some really incredible, compassionate elders and a really amazingly compassionate pastor. And if you need to get them involved to help navigate some conflict, I hate to speak for them, but correct me if I'm wrong, I think they'd be willing to do that. Because biblically, the church is here to help you no matter what it is that you're navigating. So step 3 is get the church involved. Verses 18 and 19, I felt like it would be weirder to just skip 18 and 19, so let's read them real quick. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Loosed is a weird word. I don't know why he said that. Again, truly I tell you that if 2 of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. Now, real quick, I just want to say that those 2 verses, we think Jesus was speaking to a specific group, a specific 2 people that were having some argument, and so that's probably for them. But the language Jesus uses there references back to chapter 16. If you're kind of a Bible nerd, go back and kind of read in there. But we want to get to verse 20 where Jesus says, "For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them. Thank you, God, for telling us that if there are 2 or more people here, you are with us, because whenever there's 2 or more people, there's going to be conflict. And whenever there's 2 or more people, we need the Holy Spirit to step in as a referee, right? Because when we're arguing or we're trying to solve conflict and we can get heated, we need to know that in the midst of all of that, that the Holy Spirit is 100% with us. And then Peter comes up to Jesus and says something really interesting. Jesus tells us this story seemingly out of nowhere. But Peter says, Jesus, how many times should I forgive someone? 7? Because that was kind of normal. You get 7 chances. Imagine if that's how our culture worked and you knew you had 7 times to get on your parents' nerves before they whipped that butt. You know what I'm saying? And Jesus says, actually, Peter, not 7, but 77. Jesus had a way of kind of speaking hyperbolic sometimes, but maybe even literal. Maybe he was being literal here. I don't know. He says, but Peter, let me tell you a quick story. There was this king, wink, wink. There was this king, and he had all of these servants. And this one servant owed him $1 million, this infinite amount of money that he could never hope to pay back. And the king decided to call his debt in. So he gets the servant, and he says, all right, buddy, it's time to pay up. Where's my mill? And the servant says, well, I don't have it. I just need a little bit more time. And the king says, well, too bad. I'm going to have to sell your family into slavery, and you're going to jail until you can pay it back. And the servant falls on his knees, and he says, please, no, don't do that. Please, have mercy on me. Please have mercy on me. And you know what? The king has a change of heart. He says, you know what? All your debt's forgiven because you asked. Every bit of it, all $1 million forgiven. Here's your life back. Here's your purpose back, man. Go and enjoy just being free. I've been trying the same thing with my student loans, but they're still there, baby. So that servant goes out, and he just happens, with that $1 million, he happens to be fortunate enough to have some servants of his own. And one of these servants owes him $1,000, roughly. He calls that servant in, and he says, all right, man, it's time to pay up. And the guy's like, I don't have it yet, man. I'm sorry, but I'll get it to you. He says, no, I need that money right now. And the guy says, well, I'm really sorry, I don't have it. My car broke down. I had to get it repaired. And then my wife, she needed this medication, and my kids' daycare was up. I just don't have it right now. It's really stressing me out. I'm paycheck to paycheck, man. I don't have it. Please have mercy on me. And so that servant says, oh, no, buddy, no, sirree, you're going straight to jail. In fact, I'm going to have to throw you in jail until you can pay off your debts. And the guy's like, oh, I can't believe it. And the community's like, can you believe what this guy just did? The guy that was forgiven of his $1 million debt just tried to cash in on that $1,000 debt. And the king hears about it, of course, because, social media, we hear about everything. And we're going to pick up this story in verse 32. Remember, this is Jesus telling this story. Jesus says, then the master called the servant in, and he said, you wicked servant, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had on you? In anger, we don't like to think about Jesus being angry, but Jesus is giving us this illustration and says, in anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured. That's way worse than before. And Jesus, there's kids listening to Jesus. You can't talk about torture. You can tell Jesus of Nazareth is a little fired up about this story. He should be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. And then he drops this bombshell. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Why does Jesus tell us that story? Well, he spent the first part of what we were looking at teaching us how to navigate and conflict resolution physically, and now he's moving to teaching us how to handle spiritual conflict. Let me just read it from my notes because I messed that sentence up. It's on the screen. Jesus tells the story to move us from physical to spiritual conflict resolution. Because at the heart of all conflict resolution, true conflict resolution begins with forgiveness. True conflict resolution begins with forgiveness. But TJ, once again, you don't know. You weren't there. You didn't hear, you didn't see. I get it. I get it. See, following the Jesus way isn't easy. I wish it were. My grandmother said if stuff were easy, everyone would be doing it. But following the Jesus way of handling conflict is anything but easy. It's anything but perfect. It's anything but simple. But see, forgiveness is a process. I'm not telling you say, okay, I forgive this person, and all of a sudden the clouds part, a rainbow comes out, and all of a sudden you have a handful of Skittles. It takes time. It's a process, because I'm telling you, church, you might think you've worked through some conflict and everything's fine and dandy, and you're riding down the road. A certain song comes on and it just hits a little different today. Forgiveness is a continual process, and it's a choice. It takes time. I'm not saying, when I say that conflict makes a good story great and that God can use it, I'm not saying that God causes the conflicts to happen in our life. No, I believe that sin does that. But I do believe that God can use the conflict in our lives for His glory and to bring His kingdom here to earth. The story that Jesus told, the reason Jesus told this story, it's a literal direct retelling of the gospel. The infinite forgiveness that the king gave to the first servant is the infinite forgiveness that the King of Kings, the creator of all galaxies, extends to us through His Son Jesus. And the first servant and the second servant is how we should treat each other. It's a direct retelling of God's infinite forgiveness. And here's the thing. Our unwillingness to forgive is an indicator of our response to the gospel. Because when we realize that we've been forgiven for so much, it makes it a little easier to offer that forgiveness to someone else. Not a lot easier, but a little easier. C.S. Lewis, y'all probably know from wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, great book. But C.S. Lewis once said this. This is crazy. I was finishing up this sermon this week. I was doom scrolling through TikTok, which means you just scroll endlessly. And I found this quote. C.S. Lewis said, "To be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you." That's tough. That's hard when you've been hurt deep. It's hard to equate sin and separation from God with some of the things that's been done to us. And speaking of the gospel, everything we just said might have caused a greater conflict that we might have with ourselves and with God. You might read stuff like that and think, I don't know that I'm ready for that. See, Paul talks about the same kind of thing in Romans. He says, I do the things that I don't want to do, and I don't do the things that I should do. It's this internal conflict. And there's a story, you might have heard it if you've been around student ministry for a while, of the old Native American tale about the two wolves that live inside, and they're always fighting with one another. One wants you to do good, and one wants you to do evil. One wants you to follow the light, and one wants you to be an evil person. And when asked which wolf wins, he says, the one I feed the most. I would say in order to feed the good dog or feed the good wolf in this example for our conflict we might have with God is follow those same steps. Go one-on-one with God. He can handle your anxiety, and He can handle your anger, and He can handle your language. After all, He did create us to be human and to feel things the way we feel things. And if that doesn't work, find a neutral party, someone that can walk you through it. And if that doesn't work, get the church involved. Come to the elders, come to the staff. In church, I'm not saying it's easy, but what I'm saying, what I would kind of end this with, is that all of this is possible. Forgiveness, conflict resolution with anybody, I would argue, church, that all of this is possible because the greatest conflict of all time has already been resolved. The enemy will tell you that there's no coming back, that you shouldn't forgive them for what they did or what they said, that you shouldn't be forgiven for what you did or what you said. But church, I'm telling you that it's possible because the greatest conflict of all time has already been solved. Because, church, the tomb is still empty. There is no body of Jesus of Nazareth in the Middle East. No, it's empty. It's not because someone stole it. It's because God raised Him from the dead. And if God raised Jesus from the dead, He can reconcile any relationship. If God raised Jesus from the dead, He can reconcile any relationship. So, church, we like to end our messages here at the Grove with our vision points, which are restore, thrive, and multiply. So here are your next steps this week, church, as we wrap up. The first one for restore, do you have conflict with God? Maybe you don't believe that Jesus is who he said he was, that he really is the Son of the living God. If you're having issues with that, I would say follow the same steps we talked about today. One-on-one, find a neutral party, and then go to the church. He can handle what you're going through. For thrive this week, I would say, church, start the process of forgiveness. I once heard a phrase that bitterness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. And I'm telling you, church, I don't have time to tell you a story, but if you find me afterwards, I'll tell you, man, I got a great story for this one. And I promise you that it's true. Start the process of forgiveness this week. Someone that you thought you would never be able to reconcile with. Try to start that process this week. And lastly, multiply. Tell your story or share your story of forgiveness and reconciliation, because remember, it's a direct retelling of the gospel, what God has done for us. Share that story. Let us share it through video. Share your testimony here at church. If you see someone struggling with the same conflict that you have navigated through, I'm telling you, you could lead someone to a life-changing relationship with Jesus just by sharing your story of conflict and reconciliation. Let me pray for you. God, thank you so much for the Grove. Thank you so much for Jesus and his teaching on conflict. God, we hate conflict. We hate having to deal with awkwardness, and we hate having to deal with frustrations. And God, honestly, sometimes we wish you would just take all that away. But God, we know that Jesus gave us a great example of how to navigate it, of how to be human. And we might get it wrong 9 out of 10 times, God, but you've called us to be a better version of ourselves. God, I pray for the broken relationships, maybe the broken homes, the broken workplaces. God, I pray that conflict resolution the Jesus way begins now, that we don't try to handle it on our own. We know that if 2 or more are gathered, God, that your Holy Spirit is in that moment. And God, I pray that you would start to heal hearts and heal lives and heal families here in Berkeley County starting today. We love you.